The studio was alive with energy, cameras sweeping across the room, producers signaling to hosts, and the audience buzzing with restless anticipation. Everyone expected another evening of sharp political exchanges, bold accusations, and the usual, a spectacle that came with Trump sharing a stage with his opponents. But no one anticipated that Jasmine Crockett would choose this precise moment to say something that would cut through the noise and demand the world's attention. She didn't clear her throat for effect, nor did she pause in search of drama. She leaned slightly forward in her seat, her voice low and steady, and chose her words with precision. In front of millions, she delivered the line that would change the atmosphere instantly. She suggested that Barron was not his son. The way she said it was unlike the way political figures usually lob accusations. It wasn't a jab. It wasn't theater. It sounded more like a disclosure, like she was revealing something she had carried with her and could no longer keep back. The studio, which had moments earlier echoed with interruptions and applause, fell into a silence so heavy it seemed almost unnatural. You could hear the shifting of chairs, the faint hum of the cameras, even the rustle of papers on the moderator's desk. Everyone waited, unsure whether they had truly heard what they thought they had. But the clarity of her words left no room for doubt. Trump sat rigid, his usual composure tested in a way that rarely happened on live television. He had made a career out of brushing off attacks, dismissing them with a smirk, a nickname, or a booming counterpunch. But this was different. This wasn't about money, about politics, or about his record. This was personal. His jaw tightened as the cameras cut to him, his eyes narrowing in an effort to contain the fire building inside. For once, he hesitated. He did not leap into a response. He measured his silence, though silence itself was louder than anything he might have said. Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She continued with a calm that seemed almost surgical, reminding viewers that her platform was not about spectacle, but about truth as she saw it. The power of the moment lay in her delivery. She had chosen live television because here, the statement could not be edited away. No producers could trim it down. No headlines could distort her tone. Millions were watching it unfold raw, and the permanence of live broadcasting ensured that accusation would travel instantly across the nation. The moderators fumbled. One attempted to steer the conversation back to safer ground, pivoting toward a planned question about healthcare policy. But the words barely registered. No one in the audience was listening to anything else. Viewers at home were already reaching for their phones, replaying the moment, clipping the exchange, and flooding social platforms with disbelief. Networks began to flash urgent banners across their screens, summarizing her words in bold, stark letters that would dominate coverage for hours to come. Trump finally shifted in his chair, his hand gripping the armrest as if to steady himself. He opened his mouth once, closed it, then leaned toward his microphone. He was not a man used to being caught off guard, yet here, his defense came slower than expected. He brushed the claim aside with a dismissive wave, calling it outrageous, but the hesitation had already been seen. Millions of viewers noticed the flicker of unease. It wasn't about whether the claim was true or not, it was about the moment of vulnerability. The single beat where Trump's certainty faltered. The live format made the revelation inescapable. If it had been whispered in print, it could have been denied or ignored. If it had surfaced in an interview, it might have been buried. But on a debate stage, in real time, with Trump sitting a few feet away, the effect was amplified. Crockett knew the weight of that platform. She knew that once she said it aloud, it would live on, replayed endlessly, dissected in newsrooms, debated in living rooms, and spun across both sides of the political spectrum. She had taken a truth or what she believed to be one and launched it into the largest possible arena. Trump's campaign staff rushed to recalibrate. His advisors scrambled behind the scenes, whispering among themselves, trying to prepare the right statements for reporters waiting outside. But the damage had already been done in the only way that truly mattered. Live, unscripted, undeniable. For years, Trump had thrived on controlling the narrative, bending attention toward his chosen battles. Yet this time, Crockett had seized the stage with a single sentence and turned the spotlight in a direction he hadn't prepared for. In that moment, millions watching at home weren't thinking about policies or political strategies. They were staring at the screen, frozen, trying to process what they had just heard. Crockett's decision to reveal it in front of a live national audience made the moment unforgettable. It was more than just a claim. It was a calculated strike, delivered in the one place where denial, spin, or silence could not erase it. When Jasmine Crockett spoke that night, it wasn't the content of her words alone that made the moment unforgettable. It was the way she chose to deliver them. In politics, accusations often come dressed in theatrics, spoken with raised voices, or shouted with the kind of drama meant to stir emotions rather than establish credibility. But she did none of that. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her expression composed, her tone even, and let her words fall into the room as if they were simply fact. The quiet confidence in her voice gave the statement a weight that no amount of shouting could have carried. People were not reacting to a loud claim, they were reacting to a calm revelation. Asterisk that calmness made it impossible to brush off her words as a slip of the tongue or an emotional outburst. It was deliberate. She spoke as if she had been waiting for the right moment, as if she knew that the power of what she was saying would come not from volume but from clarity. And in that moment, she transformed the atmosphere of the room. The audience had been restless before, cheering and clapping with every back and forth between Trump and his rivals. But after her words, the noise dissolved into stillness. The silence was the kind that comes when people recognize they are hearing something historic, something that cannot be taken back. Asterisk Trump, seated just feet away, was caught in a rare kind of spotlight. Normally, he thrived in these confrontations, quick to interrupt or drown out his opponents with a booming response. But the steady, measured tone of Crockett's delivery threw him off balance. It wasn't designed to provoke him, it was designed to bypass him. A shouted attack he could counter with one of his signature quips. A theatrical performance he could dismiss as fake or desperate. But calm, steady words spoken without a trace of exaggeration left him with fewer options. They didn't feel like a performance. They felt like disclosure. Asterisk. The moment echoed through the studio like a ripple across still water. Even the moderators hesitated, uncertain whether to step in or move on. The calmness in her delivery magnified the impact of what she had said, because it forced everyone to take it seriously. It was not framed as speculation, it was not framed as rumor, it was framed as truth. And when truth is delivered with such unshakable poise, it resists being brushed aside. Asterisk Trump's reaction became part of the story. He shifted in his seat, tightened his jaw, and gave the familiar dismissive gestures. But none of it erased the fact that he had been rattled. He was a man who built his image on certainty, on projecting dominance in every setting, but Crockett's.com words undercut that carefully constructed presence. For a split second, millions watching at home saw him hesitate, and that hesitation spoke volumes. Asterisk the calmness also reached beyond the debate stage. In living rooms across the country, viewers replayed the clip not to marvel at shouting or chaos, but to study her tone. Analysts and commentators would later point out that it was precisely her refusal to dramatize that gave her words staying power. A dramatic outburst might have been dismissed as politics as usual, but Crockett's delivery had none of the trappings of political theater. She wasn't grandstanding. She wasn't raising her voice. She was steady, as if stating a fact she had no reason to embellish. Asterisk. That steadiness changed the trajectory of the conversation in the days that followed. Journalists replayed her tone almost as much as her words. Commentators highlighted how Trump, who often thrived on chaos, seemed unable to control the narrative when faced with calm, measured opposition. The accusation itself was shocking, but the delivery made it believable to many who otherwise might have shrugged it off. Asterisk Trump's team tried to spin the moment as baseless, calling it nonsense and desperate politics, yet the impression had already settled in people's minds. Crockett had not shouted. She had not seemed desperate. She had not looked like she was reaching for a cheap shot. She had spoken calmly, with conviction, and that left people wondering what she knew and how she knew it. The more his allies tried to frame her as reckless, the more her tone from that night replayed in people's memories, working against them. Asterisk. In the end, it was the calmness of her delivery that kept the story alive longer than most political controversies. It wasn't fire that carried her words forward, it was steadiness. In a world where politics often feels like noise, her restraint made people lean in and listen. And for Trump, a man who thrived on shouting matches and spectacle, that quiet steadiness created one of the few moments where he could not easily dominate the stage. Trump was never a man who shied away from confrontation. On a stage filled with rivals, cameras, and moderators, he usually found comfort in the chaos. He thrived on interrupting, laughing off pointed remarks, and delivering biting comebacks that reminded his supporters why they saw him as untouchable. But on that night, when Jasmine Crockett's calm words pierced through the noise, his reaction told a story that words alone could not. For a brief, rare moment, silence clung to him more tightly than any answer he might have given. His expression hardened, his jaw set, and his eyes narrowed as if searching for a line that could neutralize what had just been said. Asterisk the cameras did not miss a beat. They zoomed in on his face, broadcasting his reaction to millions of viewers. In real time, normally, his expressions carried confident smirks, raised eyebrows, dismissive waves of the hand. But this time, there was hesitation. He opened his mouth as though ready to fire back, then stopped himself. It was not the Trump that audiences were accustomed to. He was careful, almost too careful, and that hesitation was enough for people to notice. Viewers at home studied that flicker, and commentators would later replay it over and over, pointing out the split second where the certainty drained from his posture. Asterisk for Trump, image had always been everything. He had built his career on projecting dominance, on presenting himself as a man in control of every situation. He prided himself on being unshaken, untouchable, able to brush off attacks with quick words or outright mockery. Yet in that moment, Crockett had hit a nerve, and his reaction betrayed it. He didn't rise out of his seat. He didn't launch into his usual bombastic defense. He sat there, silent, and the silence spoke louder than any words he might have uttered. Asterisk, the audience inside the studio caught it too. There was no cheering, no applause. People shifted in their seats, unsure of what to make of the silence that lingered after the accusation. Some looked directly at him, waiting for the rebuttal that never came. Others avoided his gaze altogether, as if witnessing a moment that felt too personal, too raw. The room was suspended between expectation and unease, and Trump's uncharacteristic pause deepened that tension. Asterisk, when he finally did speak, it was not with the booming confidence people had come to expect. His dismissal of the claim sounded rushed, almost rehearsed, and lacked the sharp edge that usually defined his comebacks. It was as if he had been forced into responding before he had time to craft the kind of defense he wanted, and though he waved his hand in irritation, trying to brush it off as ridiculous, the lingering image was not of his words but of his hesitation. For a man whose brand relied on certainty, even a flicker of doubt could feel like a crack in the armor. Asterisk, timing made the silence even more striking. By choosing her words carefully and delivering them without theatrics, she left no obvious path for him to counterpunch. His usual strategy was to match fire with fire, to outshout and overpower his opponents with sheer force. But her steady tone had robbed him of that opportunity. He could not accuse her of hysteria because she hadn't shown any. He could not claim she was being dramatic because she hadn't raised her voice. The steadiness forced him into a corner, and his silence revealed just how uncomfortable that corner was. Asterisk, in the hours that followed, his reaction became as much a part of the story as the accusation itself. Clips of his tightened jaw and momentary pause spread across news outlets and social media, often replayed without sound, allowing people to study his body language frame by frame. Analysts noted the way he gripped the armrest of his chair, the way his eyes darted before fixing back on her, the way he leaned into the microphone only to pull back again. These details became evidence in the public's mind, not of guilt, but of something unusual, something that disrupted the unshakable image he worked so hard to maintain. Asterisk, for Trump, the challenge was not just the accusation, but the perception created by his response. Politics is as much about performance as it is about facts, and his hesitation on that stage was a performance no one expected from him, even as he tried to move forward, returning to familiar talking points and louder statements. The impression had already been stamped into people's memories. They had seen him falter, however briefly, and once seen could not be unseen. Asterisk, that night, the silence became its own kind of headline. It was replayed, analyzed, debated, and dissected. It showed that for all his skill at commanding attention, there were moments when even Trump could be thrown off balance, and though he later found his rhythm again, delivering the forceful lines his supporters cherished, it was that brief, uncharacteristic pause, his rare silence, that remained the most talked about part of the evening. When the debate ended, the conversation did not return to the topics that had been carefully planned by the moderators. The economy, healthcare, foreign policy, none of it seemed to matter as much anymore. Instead, all focus shifted to the claim Jasmine Crockett had delivered so calmly and the way Trump had reacted. Within minutes, clips of the exchange were spreading across television networks and social media platforms. Headlines were rewritten, producers scrapped their scripts, and reporters scrambled to capture the shockwave in real time. By the following morning, the entire narrative had shifted away from politics and into the realm of family, legacy, and private truth. Asterisk, for Trump, the aftermath was unlike any other controversy he had faced. He was accustomed to attacks on his policies, his wealth, even his character. Those could be countered with statistics, with combative speeches, or with one of the dismissive nicknames he often used to undercut opponents. But this was different. This touched his family. It pulled Barron into a spotlight he had long tried to shield his youngest son from, and that fact alone made the accusation sting in ways policy debates never could. The question wasn't just about politics anymore. It was about identity and image, about the story he had told the world for years. Asterisk, the morning shows carried the clip endlessly. Analysts debated whether Crockett's words had any factual basis, but many admitted that the truth mattered less in the immediate aftermath than the perception it created. The calmness of her delivery, combined with Trump's visible hesitation, made the moment feel heavier than speculation alone. Millions who had tuned in for politics were now discussing paternity. Conversations at coffee shops, in office hallways, and across dinner tables shifted toward one question: why had Trump looked so unsettled? Asterisk, his team rushed into damage control. Statements were released, branding the accusation as outrageous and slanderous. Allies flooded news networks to dismiss Crockett as desperate, claiming she had crossed a line that decent politicians should never cross. Yet every denial seemed to carry less weight than the original moment, because the original moment had been live. People had seen his reaction with their own eyes, and no talking point could erase the hesitation they had witnessed. Asterisk, Trump himself attempted to move forward by returning to his strengths. At rallies, he used humor, sarcasm, and his signature bravado to try to downplay what had happened. He mocked the claim, calling it laughable, and urged his supporters to see it as proof of how far his opponents were willing to go. Yet the shadow of that debate moment lingered. Even among his base, some quietly acknowledged that he had looked uncomfortable in a way they had never seen before. For critics, the moment became proof of vulnerability, a crack in the armor of a man who so often projected absolute certainty. The impact stretched beyond him as well. Barron, who had always been kept away from the roughest edges of politics, suddenly found himself at the center of speculation he had never asked for. Commentators debated the ethics of bringing his name into the spotlight, with some condemning Crockett for involving a child in political warfare. Yet even those criticisms could not stop the story from dominating headlines, because once it had been said on live television, it could not be unsaid. The shift in public discourse was profound. The election narrative, which had been dominated by policy, disputes and partisan divides, was suddenly overwhelmed by whispers of family secrets. It was no longer about party lines or legislative records. It was about Trump as a man, a father, and a figure whose private life had now become a matter of public speculation. Political strategists admitted that the timing of such a revelation could not have been worse for him, as it distracted from his campaign's central themes and forced him to defend personal matters rather than political ones. What made the aftermath so remarkable was how quickly the story overshadowed everything else. It didn't matter how many speeches he gave afterward or how many press releases his team issued. The image of him sitting silent, jaw tight, under the weight of Crockett's words had already been burned into the public's memory. The fact that the conversation had shifted so completely to Barron, and to whether Trump's image of himself as the patriarch of his family was as solid as he claimed, meant that the issue would continue to resurface no matter how much he wanted to move past it. In the weeks that followed, journalists kept circling back to that single debate night. They played the clip again and again, analyzing not just what was said but how it was said, how he reacted, and how the audience responded. Every denial, every counterattack from his camp, only served to remind people of the moment that had started it all for Trump, who had spent years shaping and controlling his own narrative. The lasting impact of Crockett's words was that, for once, he had lost control of the story. As the days turned into weeks, the echo of that moment refused to fade. The debate stage had become the place where a single sentence shifted the narrative in a way no policy or promise could. What Jasmine Crockett had said lived on, not just because of the claim itself, but because of how it had been delivered and how Trump had reacted. The image of him pausing, his jaw clenched, his silence stretching longer than anyone expected, remained etched in the minds of millions. It was not simply a political confrontation anymore. It had become a cultural moment. The kind that would be replayed for years as an example of how politics can suddenly turn personal in the most public way possible. For Trump. The weight of that accusation followed him everywhere. Each rally, each interview, and each press conference was shadowed by the memory of that night. Supporters tried to brush it aside, arguing that it was nothing more than another baseless attack, but even they had seen the hesitation in his response. His opponents, meanwhile, capitalized on the moment, using it to highlight what they described as cracks in his carefully crafted image of strength and certainty. Even neutral observers admitted that, true or not, the accusation had managed to place him on the defensive in a way few other controversies ever had. The media, relentless in its cycle, kept returning to the clip. Analysts dissected the calmness in Crockett's voice, comparing it to the fiery rhetoric that often defined debates. Others examined his body language frame by frame, pointing to the smallest shifts in his expression as evidence of discomfort. What might have been dismissed as a fleeting comment became an enduring story because it was captured live, raw, and unedited. No amount of spin or denial could erase the fact that millions had witnessed it themselves. For the public, the story blurred the lines between politics and personal life. Conversations about taxes and trade gave way to speculation about family and truth. Some argued it was unfair, that children should never be dragged into the harsh glare of political battles. Others insisted it revealed something deeper about the man who had built his career on image and power. Regardless of opinion, the debate had sparked a conversation that reached beyond policy, forcing people to confront the uneasy overlap between public leadership and private legacy. By the time the storm began to settle, one thing had become clear. The accusation, the reaction, and the silence that followed had left a mark. It didn't matter whether people believed the claim itself. What mattered was that they remembered the moment, remembered how it felt to watch Trump sit in silence when he usually had so much to say. That memory was now part of his story, woven into the larger narrative of his political life. And as the campaign marched forward, it served as a reminder that in politics, sometimes it is not the loudest words that carry the greatest weight, but the quiet moments that linger long after the stage lights fade.